Welcome to the Billion Insight Podcast. I'm your host Sri. Today we are excited to welcome Dr. Nekeshia Hammond, who is a distinguished psychologist, executive coach, author of many successful books, and international speaker. Known for her work in mental health, burnout prevention, and leadership development, her impactful work has earned her many awards, including the Next Level Leadership Award and the Distinguished Psychologist Honor. Dr. Hammond's insights have been featured in major media outlets like NBC, ABC, and Essence Magazine, as well as the platform like TEDx. We are thrilled to have her on the show today to share her incredible journey and valuable insights into the human behavior. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Nekeshia Hammond to the show. So welcome, ma'am. Welcome to the Billion Insight Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
So, ma'am, can we start from the beginning? Let's start with your childhood.
Sure. So a little bit about me. Essentially, I grew up in Orlando, Florida, home of Disney World. And essentially, I grew up with my mom and brother at that time, and really started to develop a love for helping people. That was something that was very important to me growing up. I knew, even when I was a kid, I knew I really wanted to work with kids. So fast forward a lot of years, and I got my degree in clinical psychology and started working at first. So it's been 15 years that I started my private practice, but at first I was working mostly with kids and teens, also adults somewhat, doing psychological evaluations and therapy at that time. And then a couple years in, I realized that there was really a huge need for mental health services outside of my office. So I moved more into consulting with the media, more public education, more resources in the community. And then now I spend a part of my time still in the practice and also the other part of my time working with organizations and corporations on burnout prevention and speaking to different groups about mental wellness.
That's interesting. So, ma'am, if I'm not mistaken, you are in your 40s, right?
Yes.
So you grew up in 80s America.
Yes.
So what was like growing up in America in 80s for you?
It was, well, definitely a much simpler time. Of course, we didn't have social media. There was no internet when I was a little kid. I mean, there was, by the time I got to high school, but so very simple things I really loved. So I was close to Disney World, so I loved amusement parks, and I was in Florida, so it was mostly sunny all year. So just really lots of time focusing on, having fun as a kid, and there was just a lot less distractions, I think, than now. So I have a son now who's 12, and he has a tablet, there's the internet, there's YouTube. He's not on social media yet, but I mean, we know social medias are like, it's such a different time now than growing up.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how you become interested in psychology?
Yeah, I became interested in psychology actually I became interested in psychology in high school. I took 2 years of psychology in high school, so that sort of piqued my interest. But then in when I went to college, I actually had this really great professor that taught me more about psychology, and at the time, more child psychology and how you can help people. And I was always very fascinated by how the mind works too. Even from when I was in high school, I was very fascinated with that. But I learned in college more of like, how can you help people? How can you change behavior for the better? And those sorts of things, which has always been fascinating for me. So yeah, that's how I got into the field. And then after graduate school, I started a private practice, as I mentioned, about 15 years ago. And I've been doing a lot of things in the mental wellness space, but it's just a great space to help people learn about themselves, learn how to be better individuals, learn how to have a better quality of life.
Coming to today, how does your typical day usually look?
I'm laughing when you ask me that question because honestly, all my days look so different. They honestly look very different. I have a very interesting schedule, I feel like, with a lot of different projects normally, but I love it. So, though some of the things that try to remain the same in my day is I always try to make sure that I make time for movement. So exercise in some form is very, very important to me. So I make sure that's somewhere in my day as much as I can. And then also I started a couple years ago, I started a better morning routine where as soon as I wake up in the morning, I have a gratitude practice, which for me looks like thinking about one unique thing that I'm grateful for that happened either a couple days before or is about to happen a couple days from now. So within a week, keeping it present. And then also leaving time for devotional prayer time. So that's how I start my days now, which is way better for my mental health. And then my days they consist of a lot of different things. Right now, I'm in the middle of launching my next book. So podcast interviews and doing different things related to the book, speaking to different communities, depending on what day it is, and then also spending a part of time at my private practice. Yeah. And then outside of work, I also have a 12-year-old son who I mentioned. So sometimes it's going to basketball games and spending time with family. So yeah, my days are very busy and it's a new thing depending on what day it is.
Yeah. That's really interesting, man. Yeah. So you mentioned that you do exercise and all. So do you do yoga, meditation?
I love meditation. So I try to find time within the days, even if it's something short, to just kind of quiet the mind, be in a calmer space mentally. And yoga, I love too. I actually did yoga pretty frequently up until the pandemic, up until about 2020. And then of course, all the yoga studios shut down. So that's one of my goals to get back into true yoga, but I do still do yoga poses at home. But I do something called CrossFit, which I think it's global exercise routine, but it's basically group classes. It's a pretty rigorous workout, but that's one of the things I love. And I also love nature walks too, which is really good for your mental health and wellness. So those are some of the ways that I like to be active.
That's interesting. So ma'am, I have some rudimentary question about a mental health professional that I like to ask you.
Oh, for sure.
So first of all, could you explain the key difference between the psychologist and the psychiatrist?
So the key differences are that a psychologist goes to graduate school and gets a degree in psychology, some area of psychology, versus a psychiatrist goes to medical school and gets basically an MD, a medical degree, and then specializes in psychiatry. And then for us in the US, for most of the states, psychiatrists are the one that prescribe medication or are allowed to prescribe medication. And then for most of the states, psychologists don't prescribe medication. There are some exceptions, but for most states, psychologists do not prescribe medication and instead do therapy or evaluations or serve in some other manner.
So in what situation would you recommend seeing a psychologist instead of psychiatrist or vice versa?
Yeah, so typically if someone one of my subspecialties are doing psychological evaluations, which means I've done a lot of IQ tests and personality tests and social emotional learning and things like that. So those type of evaluations would be more from a psychologist who specializes in, say, ADHD or learning disabilities or depression, anxiety, or whatever the evaluation is, versus a psychiatrist most times is more helpful if someone needs medication for some type of mental health condition. So those are the two biggest areas. And also most people will go to a psychologist for therapy as well. Even though I do believe that some psychiatrists do therapy as well, but yeah, mostly psychologists.
So you mentioned that you do some IQ and all. So do you believe the MBTI indicator, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, do you think that is really works?
The Myers-Briggs?
Yep.
Yeah, I would think that's helpful. That's not a test that I give specifically. There's a lot of different tests though. I have heard positive things though about the Myers-Briggs, but I will say in clinical psychology, our tests are more designed to look at if the person has an actual disorder. So if the person has like clinical depression or an anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or something else that's like clinical diagnosis, versus there's some other tests that look at this personality types and how you interact with the world and some strengths about you, which are a bit different than like clinical psychology world, but still very valuable. It just depends on what setting you're in.
What other method would you prescribe to people to opt? I have seen many people, they opt the MBTI technique. Is there any other thing they should explore?
So So when it comes to looking at different things about like what are your strengths, let's say, strength finders, there's something called the DISC assessment. So it's D as in David, I, S as in Sam, C as in cat. So that those types of assessment, it doesn't have to just be DISC, but they tell you different things about who you are, like what are your strengths, how do you show up in the world, like, and it's helpful, especially in work settings, because it tells you, like, are you very extroverted? Are you very introverted? Are you very driven? Do you need a slower pace, a faster pace work environment? Like things like that are really, really helpful to learn more about you and the best work environment and the best maybe team if you're on a team, or how to lead people, leadership skills. Those types of assessments are helpful in that department. But if someone's on the other side of it, if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, I'm not sure if I have ADHD or clinical depression or an anxiety disorder or something like that, that you would need to go to an actual psychologist for, because those types of tests are not online. If they are online, don't believe them. You need to go to a mental health professional who specializes in testing for those things, because that's something different. That's more of like a diagnosis, and then there's a treatment plan depending on what's going on. But yeah, definitely two separate worlds.
Yeah, that is true, very true.
Yeah.
Moving on. So, ma'am, can you explain the different branches of psychology to our listener for those who want to pursue their career in psychology?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of different areas. What I would say, so if someone's trying to pursue their career in psychology, there are a couple different umbrellas, if you will. When I say umbrellas, I mean like the first question is like, what's your goal, right? As far as the field of psychology, because psychology, there's a whole area of education. So there's people, of course, that are professors and teaching psychology, right? Like, is it that particular area, or there's the area of therapy? So becoming, let's say, a psychologist or a mental health professional in another area. There's master's level mental health professionals or counselors, and there's also doctoral level psychologists. So that's a choice if you're looking more into the counseling route. Like I said, well, what I do, I don't do counseling, but I do psychological evaluations part of the time in my crazy schedule. But that's another option too, to specialize in doing those type of assessments. So IQ tests, so social emotional testing, again, looking at attention, looking at personality, things like that. And then the other part, the field of psychology, is there's so many different settings to work in. So some of my colleagues work in hospitals, right? They actually, I did my internship in a medical hospital, and I remember going to the medical floor and doing, anyways, consultations with the medical patients, obviously related to mental health, but that's a possibility of like a medical hospital setting. There's veterans hospitals, there's the courts use psychologists as well. The jails, like jails or prisons, use psychologists. So there's a lot more places, private practice, agencies. So the other question is, what type of setting or who do you want to serve? Are you trying to serve kids, adults, elderly population? And yeah, there's, like I said, a lot of different options. But the first question to really help to define it is, who is it that you want to help? What type of population do you want to help? And then that can start to narrow down the process. But the good news is it's such a broad field, and there's really a lot of need when it comes to mental health, or when it comes to the field of psychology. So a lot of options.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone considering a career in psychology today?
What advice? I would definitely say, so one of the things that's really important, well, I'll say the field of mental health, because that's, okay, if you're not going to be a professor, that's a different field for psychology. But if you're in the mental health provider type of space, one of the things that's extremely important for people to recognize is that you have to be taking care of yourself also. There's something called compassion fatigue, which is very common with especially the helping professionals, as they call us, which basically means you give so much of yourself, you help so much that you burn out and you get exhausted and you become tired, compassion fatigue. And so it's really important for anyone trying to get into the mental health field as a mental health provider of any sort, that you take some steps back and recognize what is your own self-care plan, recognize how can you best take care of yourself, because it can be hard some days to work in this field, but if you work on taking care of yourself, you can show up that much better for your patients and also for yourself and your family or your friends or whomever else it is that you have to show up for. But that's something that's really important. And I wish that I understood that more when I was starting to get into the field 15 years ago. But that's definitely something I would tell to a new professional getting into the mental health field.
Yep, yep. People who help other people, often they forget about taking care about themselves. So yeah, it is very true.
Yes.
So ma'am, what trends do you see that shaping the future of mental health care?
Friends. Well, what happened after COVID, after the pandemic in 2020? Well, we already had telemedicine or telehealth, so
Yep.
like virtual type of therapy sessions and things like that. But
Yep.
after the pandemic, that really
Suit up.
became much more more popular. Yeah. So there are so many ways now. The access is getting better to receive help and therapy. So whether it's by phone or by, online on a computer or text messages or just different ways to get help. That's been a huge trend. The other trend I think is that thankfully, which is a good thing, is that we're working in the mental health community to reduce the stigma of mental health. And there's so many more conversations now about how it's okay not to be okay. You can receive mental health help.
Yeah.
You don't have to be afraid. Please do your self-care. Like those are a lot of conversations that have been happening, thankfully. And so I think we've also changed the narrative on mental health education or mental health treatment as well.
Yep. You just mentioned the stigma surrounding people who seek help from the psychologist. Many people, especially from the older generations, believe that if someone visits a psychologist or a therapist, they must have a serious mental problem.
Yeah.
In contrast, many younger people going to a psychologist is normal, similar to visiting a dentist.
Exactly. Yes.
They acknowledge the importance of taking care of our mental well-being. So why do you think this change is happening, and how can we help reduce the stigma around mental health?
Yeah, I think it's happening. Well, let's speak specifically to the younger generation because of something called TikTok
Yeah.
and social media. It
Yeah.
it actually became kind of cool, like to take care of yourself and to have a therapist or to have a life coach or to have someone helping you along the way in life. Like it's funny because I'm around young people as well and teens in particular. And it's so funny because, again, well, there's some teens that are getting all their information, maybe too much information from TikTok or some other social media source, Snapchat or whatever it is. But though, what's kind of cool is that there are some good people on these platforms sharing good information. Not always. Some of the information I am very worried about because it's not true, but there's still also other people that are sharing good information like, hey, here's how to take care of yourself. Hey, here's some things you can do to make your life better. Like that sort of information is also out there from influencers and that sort of thing. And what's happening too, which is kind of interesting, is people are showing their lives more. Like let's say someone with ADHD or someone with depression or anxiety, they're showing teens like, hey, this is what it really could look like, which makes people to understand conditions better because it can be really scary if you're a young person or even a college student and you get, let's say, a panic attack. That's very scary if you don't know what that is. But when you get educated and you understand, oh, it's due to anxiety, here's what you can do to help it, here's what you can do to prevent it in the future. Like that's really valuable information and it's literally at our fingertips now through our cell phones. So that has definitely been happening more. And again, there's pros and cons. Yes, there's a lot of misinformation too, but that's been happening more for our younger crowd. And then as far as reducing the stigma of mental health, one of the things that has really been beneficial and we're again trying so hard to do in the mental health field is really continue to educate people. Because when I talk to different communities, and it's always interesting and fascinating to me. Again, one of my subspecialties is ADHD, let's say. So when I talk to different parents or different teachers about here's what ADHD is, here's what it's not, here's how to help this child or, help this student, here's what we can do, like that type of information can help as far as the stigma of mental health because it's not just the person seeking help that has the stigma, but it's also other people that see certain things and make assumptions, right? There's this oh, this person has ADHD or depression, anxiety, and then we make certain stereotypes about it. And now because there's stigma related to it, or we can't talk about it. So education is really the key at a large scale if we're going to continue to work on reducing the stigma of mental health and making sure that people know it's okay and not have every day be okay.
You mentioned that we have get some benefit from TikTok because we have been hearing about so much negativity about all the social media. But the one thing is definitely is a positive development that people are more aware of this situation. They think it's a good thing to have an appointment with the therapist. That's definitely the good point is happening with the social media.
Yes.
And yeah, but one thing is here is, many people struggle with the depression, this social media age, especially when they see some of their friend posting with a picture of themselves in the Lamborghini. People often, people often compare their life to that friends, They would think that I even can't afford a second-hand Audi, but my friend is riding a brand new luxury car every day.
Yes.
This can lead to them feel sorry about themselves, right? They think like I'm left behind. I'm such an unsuccessful person. Even the friend who posted that picture might beg. I have seen many places where people display luxury cars and let others to take picture with them for social media for a few bucks, So this is so funny. People are doing this. But this part of the social media, people never see, right? It is often overlooked. People automatically believe that everyone else's life is perfect except theirs,
Yes.
So my question is, how can we help people to deal with these feelings and develop a healthier mindset when using social media? Or do you think it would be better for us to avoid social media altogether?
Yeah, great question. So I always recommend to people that, well, first of all, I always remind people because we need reminding that every single thing you see on social media is a highlight reel of someone's life. If you see a 20-second video of someone out of 24 hours of their day, you don't know anything about them. We make this assumption that because oh my God, look at this amazing clip, or like you said, someone's in a Lambo, someone's on a yacht, someone's on a private jet, whatever. Again, 20-second video of 24 hours, you have no idea what's really going on in their life. So that's step one, to remind yourself that it's a short amount of time that told you basically nothing about this person. The second thing is, I highly recommend to people, take the social media breaks if you need to. Because a lot of times, if we start to take a step back and be aware that, they call it doom scrolling, but you're starting to do the scrolling, you're starting to feel sad, you're starting to tell yourself things that normally are not true, like I'm not good enough, or I'm not whatever enough, I should have this person's lifestyle. When those thoughts start to come into mind, you may need to step away from the platform. Take the social media breaks as needed, because I will tell you that spending a lot of time on social media and comparing yourself to others constantly, like you mentioned, it can definitely lead to anxiety, definitely lead to depression. Now you're taking actions and doing things that you didn't want to do in the first place because you're trying to keep up with what you're seeing online, which is only a highlight reel. So, and what's interesting about this question too, I've had so many conversations with people. I mean, at this point in my career, I've talked to thousands and thousands of people and heard a lot of stories. And there's a lot of people that I've talked to that have admitted, like, I am like putting things on social media that it does not reflect where I'm at right now. Like, people have said to me, like, I'm so depressed, or I'm so anxious, or whatever it is in a dark season of their life. They're not putting any of that on social media. So again, but people will see that and be like, everything is perfect. Look at this person's house. Look at their car. Look at their relationship. Look at this. It's perfect. No, it's not. Because you don't see the other side of it. Yeah, it's happened very, very often.
Yep. You never know the Lambo which your friend is riding is a rented one, or he actually bought that.
Yes, exactly.
So, ma'am, while many people are starting to recognize the importance of mental health, but there are still those who struggle with the difficulty, like you just mentioned, that you have talked to many people, but they never posted anything about their depression. They only posted good thing. This is a human nature, right? We never want to show us our other side. We only want to show the good thing about ourselves,
Yes.
Yeah. So,
and there's nothing, I was going to say, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that part. However, the problem is for the other person that's watching it and assuming that everything's perfect. Oh, you have a perfect life. No, they don't.
Yep,
None of
yep,
us have a perfect life. So
yep,
that is the problem, right? Like
exactly.
when you start to just, your brain tells you things that are not true on social media.
Yeah, very true. So ma'am, talking about a depression, for those who struggle with difficulties like depression and may not acknowledge the support system available to them. So my question is, how can someone know when it's time
Mhm.
to seek help and talk to a professional?
When it comes to depression, which is actually one of the most common mental health conditions globally, it's pretty high up there. One of the things, there's a lot of red flags to look out for. One
Hmm.
of the things to keep in mind when it comes to depression, when it gets to like having a bad day versus clinical depression, is the amount of time. So if you have a bad day, that is normal. You feel sad, you're maybe crying, you feel down, you don't feel like eating, you're having problems sleeping for a day, bad day, that's okay. If it becomes weeks and weeks of time, that's where it becomes a red flag. So problems with eating, you're eating too much, you're eating too little, problems with sleeping. You can't fall asleep, you can't stay asleep, you don't feel like doing the things you used to do, you're feeling sad, you're feeling hopeless, feeling worthless, like all those types of things, again, for weeks and weeks at a time, is definitely a red flag, and you need to reach out to a mental health professional. I will also say though, and I wouldn't put this on someone, you don't need to be a psychologist to try to diagnose yourself. I'd rather people go to a mental health professional. But I will say that sometimes we go through things in our life, whether it's the loss of a job, the loss of a relationship, something changed, grief of some sort, losing someone through grief. There's different things that happen in our lives, and that can trigger depression, which is, if you lost someone, like say through the grief, that's a normal reaction. But again, I'd rather someone say, you know what, here's, I just heard some of the red flags, I think it's applying to me, let me reach out to a mental health professional and check in. And they will either tell you, yes, you're correct, you are, you have clinical depression, or they might say, you know what, you're doing great and you're having some of these symptoms because of this major thing that just happened in your life and you're having some adjustment issues
Yep.
or something else. But I would rather people not play the guessing game, because the thing is, if you don't address mental health conditions early, it in many cases can get worse. So
Mm-hmm.
so reach out to a mental health professional early when you have
Mm-hmm.
some of those red flags.
Yep, yep, yep. So, ma'am, often we see people are surrounding us. They might into depression. So, what the sign that help identify other people who may be experiencing deep depressions?
How can we help others who we
Yeah, I
see?
mean,
Is that what you said?
how to identify whether a person is
Oh,
going through the depression or not?
yeah. So if it's a friend or a loved one, someone that you know and can have a good conversation with, some of the things to look out for are, so there's, well, people at different levels in our lives, but let's say this is someone that you typically spend time with, then you notice they're not spending as much time with you, they're withdrawing more, you notice they're being more isolating, they're not wanting to hang out or talk on the phone or however it is that they were communicating with you. Maybe you know that they've had to miss a lot of days of work, or they're not doing as well in, in their family life or whatever other roles that they play. And when you notice as a friend or a loved one that you just know that gut instinct, sometimes you're like, man, this person is off, like they are very different, they're not who I know them to be. I would say to have a conversation with them, which looks very differently depending on how close they are to you. But have a conversation, just saying like, hey, I'm noticing these things about you, like, are you okay? And some people will lie to you and be like, yep, I'm fine. And they're not. Some people, though, will open up and say, I'm glad you asked because I'm really struggling right now in this particular area. But either way, you can always recommend, like, hey, maybe you can see a therapist. Maybe that's someone that can help you through this time. If the person is not willing to see a therapist, which is the case, as we know, for some people, then the best thing that you can do is to do your best to support them in the way that they need the support, whether it's checking in with them, whether it's helping them. It could be just things around the house that they need help with, whether it's providing a listening ear. Like, there's a lot of things you can do to support people that is not therapy if they choose not to go that route, because the power of human connection is extremely underrated. It is, I mean, man, there's so many articles, research articles that I've read about how powerful social support is, especially in the case of depression. People need to feel that someone cares about them. That can be healing in and of itself. So those are just a couple things. There's a lot more, of course, but those are just a couple of things that people can do if they're concerned that someone else has some sort of depression.
Yep. That's true, ma'am. This is very sensitive thing. We have to open up with the person first in order to know what is actually going on with their life.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, you mentioned that panic attack. So, can you explain what panic attack is?
Yeah. So a panic attack is essentially also known as like an anxiety attack, where sometimes it can be triggered by something in your environment, like you see something concerning or scary, or there's some type of trauma and there's a trigger, or not, or sometimes it just sort of pops up. But essentially, there's different ways that people experience it. The way that a lot of people describe it is that it feels like it could feel like you're having a heart attack. It could feel like you're about to die. Your heart is racing. Your palms are sweaty. You typically have some sort of physical reaction to it. It's an extreme sense of fear. Maybe something bad is going to happen, like those sorts of feelings. And it's very scary. I know I had a panic attack when I was in high school, actually. I had no idea what it was, and it was terrifying because I didn't have the education to understand what a panic attack was, because no one ever taught me what a panic attack was. But nonetheless, it really is, it's very scary. I've worked with patients too who have actually gone to the emergency room because they didn't know what a panic attack was either. And then when they got to the emergency room after having that type of an episode, then they, ran all the tests or whatnot. They're like, your heart's fine, everything's fine medically, but your anxiety level got so high that you had a panic attack. So that's essentially what it is. And it can last a varying amount of time depending on who you are. But the good news is when you do understand what it is, then you can work on reducing your anxiety so it doesn't turn into a full-blown panic attack.
So, ma'am, how scary panic attack can be?
When you don't know what it is, it's terrifying. It can be very terrifying. So if all of a sudden, someone had an issue where they couldn't breathe, heart is racing really fast, you may have some sort of chest pain, and you're nervous, like you're like, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack, right? And then if you think like, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack, then your heart rate actually goes up even more. So your heart is racing and you're like, oh my God, I never felt this before. What am I going through? Like, it's pretty terrifying. But for people that do know what it is, like when okay, this is a panic attack, I have panic attack, then I mean, it's still scary, but it's, like, I'm not about to die. I'm not having a heart attack right now. I'm actually having a panic attack. And there are overlapping symptoms, which is actually makes it even scarier for people that truly are having a heart attack and having chest pain. So I don't want anyone I don't want to minimize that, but it's important to see a mental health professional, and well, definitely an ER, if it's the first time you're experiencing that, for them to say like, hey, this is a panic attack, or this is an issue with your heart, or whatever is the case.
So, ma'am, once you acknowledge that, yes, the anxiety which you are going through is actually, in fact, is a panic attack. So what do you do if you are suffering from it?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is that you really, it's really hard sometimes because you're in a state of panic. But if you recognize it early, your goal is to get into a calmer state, which can happen with like taking some calming deep breaths. Not always the easiest thing to do if you're in a state of panic, but for many people that I've worked with anxiety disorders, it can work. It takes practice though. But if you get into the deep breath, like stopping what you're doing, taking some deep breaths and allowing your heart rate to go back to normal, let's say, then that helps your brain also to be like, okay, I don't need to be in a sense of panic. My heart rate is going down. I'm not going to die. Like there's things that you can tell yourself and also physically get yourself back into a calmer state. How long it takes to get into a calmer state, it really varies by person. I've heard some people say they were able to take the deep breaths, tell themselves calming things. I'm safe. I'm okay. I'm not dying, like it's just anxiety, like things like that. And it takes maybe a couple minutes. For some people, it takes a much longer amount of time, but it takes practice to get to the point where you can work on like reducing your heart rate, reducing the anxiety feeling that you're
Yep,
having.
yep,
But
yep.
you can reverse it with practice and with time.
So actually, I don't know whether it is panic attack or not, but whenever I feel some anxiety, if I'm on an anxious state or something like that, what I do is I put my earphone and put some rock music like the We Will Rock It from
That's
Freddie
good.
Mercury Queen. So that instantly
Yeah.
make me feel better.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's another way too, definitely to deal with anxiety. Like, I mean, there's so many different ways, but yeah, if it's music, like for
Yeah,
some people that works so well, but it has to
yeah,
be music, like you said, for you, that
yeah,
will reduce your anxiety. Because there's some types of music that'll make us
yeah,
more anxious. But whatever type of music, and there's no right or wrong answer, but whatever type of music that
yeah,
for you will get you back into a calmer state, that's it. Yeah,
yeah,
that for sure.
yeah. So ma'am, you are specialized in helping corporate executive with burnout prevention. So can you tell us what is burnout is
Yeah.
and what are the common signs of burnout you have observed?
Yeah. So burnout is essentially being very exhausted,
Mhm.
fatigue, but it's chronic. So it's not
Yeah.
like I had a bad day at work, I'm really tired.
Mm.
That is not burnout. It's when weeks and weeks and months you are so physically and or emotionally mentally fatigued from so much going on, being so overwhelmed, so many things happening. It's almost like you start to shut down and you can't complete your, well, either you can't complete your work at all or not in the way that you used to. So it starts affecting your productivity. It can start affecting your your ability to like produce work, or also the quality of your work is also affected.
Mm.
And burnout over time, if not addressed, it actually can lead to depression, anxiety, and other type of disorders if it's not addressed early enough.
Earlier, what was I thinking is burnout is like a chronic panic attack, but is more than that, right?
Yeah, and yeah, I mean technically yes, a person could have a panic attack if they're just so burnt out, but a
Yeah.
lot of times it's that point of exhaustion where like you're doing so much, you don't have time for leisure time. You're not thinking positively about work. Maybe you're just dreading work. You're having problems sleeping. For some people, problems eating. Like it's such a sense of like being overwhelmed, which is impacting not just work, but like work and a lot of different things and roles that you play around you.
So the burnout could be any reason, right? It may be there is something
Yeah.
wrong with your environment which you're working in. Maybe maybe your mindset. You are not looking the things positively.
Oh yeah, for sure. And usually there's a high level of burnout from work. That's actually a pretty common reason, but like you said, it can come from many different forms. It could be from home life, it could be from, whatever it is that you're doing that is so stressful, chronically stressful,
Yep.
that's leading to burnout. There's something called caregiver burnout as well, which is basically people that are taking care of other people. So
Mm.
let's say you're taking care of a parent who's very sick or very ill. That is a that can also lead to burnout, right? Like just the amount of time, the amount of effort, it's physically exhausting. So burnout comes in many different forms. I mean, comes from many different sources depending on what it is for you.
Yep. So, ma'am, what are some simple everyday practice people can adopt to improve their mental health?
Simple everyday practices. Okay, so one of the things that I love, this is something I teach pretty often
Mm.
when I work with different organizations, is something what I call take a minute. And this is something I started myself many years ago when I hit burnout and I needed to make some positive changes in my life. But essentially, each day, if you took 60 seconds in your day for yourself, which could look like taking some deep breaths, it could look like taking a quick walk outside, or if you believe in prayer, or whatever it is in those 60 seconds, you take that time for you to train your brain to reset and recharge, because we are so flooded with information around us, whether it's social media, traditional media, we have our own personal lives, your friends or family are calling. Like it can be a lot. It's very overwhelming. But when you put that practice into place as a start, it can start to retrain your brain to understand that you deserve to have self-care, you deserve to be emotionally healthy during that time. So that's one practice that I highly recommend to people, especially for people who feel like they're really, really busy and it's hard to give themselves all the self-care time that they need. Then you start with taking a minute.
That's interesting. So 1 minute can change your life, but definitely I can see the positive impact a person get if they do this. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah.
So ma'am, can you explain what ADHD is?
Yeah. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And essentially there's a couple of different types of ADHD, but essentially it is having chronic difficulties with attention, difficulties with concentration. For some people, they have difficulties with what we call impulsiveness. Sometimes there's a hyperactive component as well, like feeling very fidgety, moving around a lot. Like for kids at school, they might be in and out of their seat when they're not supposed to be. Or someone at work is just feeling very anxious, very restless all the time. And though it's really important to understand that a lot of things look like ADHD, though it's not always ADHD, which is what I basically said in the last book that I wrote about ADHD. It's not always ADHD, but it's really critically important to get to a mental health professional to assess if it's ADHD or if it's something else causing these attention and concentration issues.
I have a guest on my show. He has ADHD. I asked him how he knew he had it. So he said he has a hard time focusing on one subject. So whenever he into a conversation, he talks about a topic. He says he often goes off track and discusses related things, So is this what ADHD is like, right?
Okay, it is a symptom of ADHD, but what's really hard about ADHD, so that is one symptom, meaning like people that are in a conversation and then their brains have a hard time staying focused on what they're talking about. So then they jump to something else, like you said, and then they jump to something else. And then by the time you know it, you're like, wait a minute, we're 4 topics in, like, what are we talking about? Again, that is one symptom, but that symptom is also a symptom of other conditions as well. So with ADHD, what happens, and I think that's why it's misdiagnosed often, is because sometimes we hear one thing and we're like, oh, we have ADHD. When it's like, well, there's like many things that have to occur together for it to be truly diagnosed with ADHD.
Yep. So ma'am, if someone had ADHD in childhood, but it was never recognized, and they realize as an adult that they have it, what steps should they take to address their condition?
So if I'm assuming, so if they went to a professional and they actually got diagnosed instead of self-diagnosing, then there's a lot of things that adults can still do to help with ADHD, depending on what form of ADHD they have. So there's different forms. One form is what we call predominantly inattentive presentation. Another one is predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation. And then there's a combined presentation. But if, let's say they have the one where they're having problems with inattention, there's a lot of different type of organizers now that's online that can help with like setting up a work day, making sure you're organized, making sure you have certain routines into place that can help to reduce the distractions. A lot of times people with ADHD, I know I've worked with some organizations who have remote employees. So they have employees that are working from home, and the employees were like, we're really struggling with staying on task because it's so distracting in their house, because they're like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, right? So it's a distracting environment. So the goal is, how can you set up your environment in such a way that it's less distracting for you? So that's one thing to do. The other thing is to make sure that you're really prioritizing your day, which also can help with distractions. Like from the start, like here's the things that I would like to get done today, but also not having the self-blame or the guilt when not every single thing gets done, because sometimes with ADHD, it's just really hard. If you had a to-do list, let's say with 10 things, but you got distracted throughout the day, so you only got to 6 or 7 of them, working on not getting into the place of the self-blame and the guilt, but instead saying, hey, I got, whatever, 7 things done. I did the best I could. I reduced my distractions, but I also recognized that my ADHD did impact, right, a part of my day. And then the third thing to think about for people that have ADHD, and many people don't know this, but for some organizations, or for many organizations, I should say, they will put what they call it accommodations into place for someone who has ADHD, which means in a work setting, for example, they may say, okay, we recognize you have this ADHD, you have documentation, all that sort of thing, took it to HR, and we will put into place something where whatever it is that's helpful for them. So maybe you're allowed to take extra breaks, or you're allowed to take this meeting in a separate quiet room, or you're allowed to do this particular task and in a certain way that's a little bit different from what everyone else is doing, or you have extra time, whatever it is that can be helpful. There's things that workplaces can also do to help people, like to help set up their environment for them to be successful too.
Oh, wow. They just not acknowledging that their employee is having the ADHD, but also they took a extra step to facilitate them to, how to treat their ADHDs. That's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's a lot of organizations, because I know for some people I've spoken to also, even like the work schedule, like their schedule for the day was changed a bit to help with ADHD. I mean, again, companies can do all sorts of different things. Of course, there's different resources depending on what company you're at, but they can definitely help as well in that arena.
So, ma'am, what do you think about how common ADHD is among people?
So what happens is that unfortunately it is either misdiagnosed, or people a lot of times self-diagnose it, which the people are just like, I think I have ADHD, which maybe, but maybe not. And the problem with that, though, I will say, especially if there's someone who's misdiagnosing themselves or a family member or a friend, because people will look at people like, oh, you're having problems you're having problems attending to information. Okay, it's ADHD, right? But the problem with that is that when you do that and make an assumption, you don't really address the true issue sometimes. So this person may actually have anxiety, which is treated in a different way than ADHD, or they may be going through something traumatic or something difficult in their life. And now you thought they had ADHD, but they really need to process that. So it's just really important. I'm a huge advocate, and I know for being in this space too, that it's just a huge important thing to make sure that we are properly getting the assessments that we need to understand what is really going on, so we can best help like the true issue at hand.
Yeah. So, ma'am, do you think people often confuse ADHD with dyslexia?
So yes, for kids especially. I've had kids too that again, making assumptions. So people will say, oh, this kid has ADHD. That's why they're not paying attention. And then when I do the testing with them, I actually have found in many cases where they did not have ADHD, but instead they had a reading disability. Like you said, they had dyslexia, or they had a writing disability or math disability. When you do that, when you have a disability, a reading issue, let's say, it's really hard to pay attention to what's in front of you, because you cannot read what's in front of you, or you learn in a different way, and it makes it really hard to pay attention. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, I've seen that many times, many times.
Yep. So, ma'am, what advice do you give to parents once they acknowledge that their kids have going through ADHD?
What advice? One is that, and I don't mean to have lower expectations, but have realistic expectations. If you have recently found out as a parent your child has ADHD, you must adjust your expectations of what they can do, because it's not that they're not able to do certain things, but they might need information presented to them differently than what you expect. So, for example, oftentimes I have many parents who I've spoken with, who will give a multi-step direction to this child. So they may be like, okay, go brush your teeth, go wash your face, go put your backpack away, clean your room. Okay, that's like 4 different things that you just told this child to do. And then the parent will get frustrated when 1 or 2 of them get done. And it's not that necessarily, yes, kids don't want to do their chores sometimes or do what you tell them, but sometimes kids with ADHD, they've already forgotten the other 3 things that you said. So they might remember the first thing, maybe the second thing. They're not remembering the third and fourth thing that you said, because some kids with ADHD, they don't do well with multi-step direction. So instead, you say the first thing you need, 1 it gets done, then you tell them the next thing, then you tell them the next thing. And that's just one example, but the point is, you have to adjust your expectations. I've met a lot of parents too who have gotten very frustrated with kids. Understandably, it's frustrating sometimes. But then it's funny because I'll do the testing and I'll show, anyways, the different scores when it comes to their what's called working memory, when it comes to their ability to truly pay attention to what is being told to them and the way that they learn best. And then parents will be like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Now I need to make some adjustments in the way that I give information to this child and make some adjustments in my expectations of what they're able to do and the way that I set it up for them. And then the kid can be more successful and there can be less conflict at home. So that's one of the major things that parents can do. And well, secondly, and make sure that you have what I call the team approach, meaning you should have a team of people who are best supporting you through this process. So it could be like a therapist. Maybe it's a psychiatrist for medication. Maybe it's some type of support group for kids with ADHD or parents with ADHD. Maybe it's your friends, your family members. Maybe there's some other type of specialist, but you have to set up who is on your team to get through this right now and to best give you the information and the help that you need.
Definitely, that's interesting. So ma'am, can ADHD be improved or cured if treated earlier?
Technically right now they say there's not a cure per se. It's a very strong word, cure. However, there are kids, it's not necessarily that they outgrow it. There's kids that are diagnosed with ADHD as children and then adults, they don't necessarily meet the full criteria, but that could be also because they've learned the skills of how to manage it. So it's not affecting their functioning in a negative way. There are many people with ADHD who are highly successful as adults, many, but they've learned the skills of how to manage the inattention, the distractions. They put things into place, maybe in the work setting, things at home, to make their lives easier.
I definitely must say that curable must be a strong word. What I meant by is improved.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, ma'am, can we talk about another sensitive topic, the narcissist personality disorder?
Sure. So, essentially, with narcissistic personality disorder is one of the diagnosed personality disorder. There's a couple. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about this one actually is that I've seen all over social media. There's usually someone or another talking about narcissistic personality disorder. It's essentially a disorder where person has a very, well, they say inflated sense, but extremely strong sense of self-importance. But the problem is it's usually at the expense of someone else. So needing feeling very entitled, maybe being colder towards others, very difficult time handling criticism. One of the things though that's important to recognize as far as a personality disorder is this is something that is very chronic. So again, not just having a bad day, not just someone having a bad week, but this is something chronically that's affected this person throughout their life, essentially.
Yep. You know, the terms like ADHD, NPD, and bipolar disorder have become so popular on social media lately, mm-hmm. which is definitely a good thing. People are becoming more aware of these terms. So what do you think is the reason they are getting so popular all of a sudden, especially post-COVID?
Yeah. We had a lot of time on our hands during COVID pandemic. We were all at home. I think, I wondered that myself. I'm not in the treatment side of mental health. I'm more in the psychological evaluation diagnosis side. But I would just make an educated guess that right now, or especially what started happening the last couple of years as podcasts became more popular, we see all of this gender wars and relationship wars and it's such a thing right now. And then I feel like people narcissistic personality disorder is almost one of the mental health conditions of the day that people said, oh, let me find something to cling to. It started to go viral, and then we're just in this who's narcissistic? Is she narcissistic? Is he narcissistic? So it became this whole in the gender battle relationship thing that's happening right now on social media that really just got thrown in there.
Yeah. Definitely, ma'am. Yep.
So,
since we see that the rise of the podcasting, I mean, everybody is jumping into this bandwagon. So, only after that we see that this kind of talk is getting the mainstream attention, Earlier it was
Mm-hmm.
buried under the books only, but now people are making content out of it, so that's why it is surfacing on the internet.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
So, ma'am, can we talk about your book and your show, which is a mental health movement with Dr. Hammond?
Yes. So my next book coming out here it's called Mindset Training, Conquer Your Mind, and the rest will follow. More information about it is at mindsettrainingbook.com. And essentially, this book, it's my fourth book, but this one is more about holistic self-care. Like, how can you work on making yourself your number one priority? How can you work on growing as a person, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally? I found as a psychologist that a lot of times we either one don't reflect enough on our journeys, have that self-reflection time on our journeys, or we are very focused maybe on one area of our life, but we leave out all the other areas and everything is related to another. So I just really believe strongly in like a holistic approach, especially when it comes to taking care of ourselves and growing in our mindset growth. And then as far as my show, it has been, I think it started in like 2016. I was trying to figure out the other day when it started. It's been a long time. But nonetheless, yes, it's called Mental Health Moment with Dr. Hammond. And I essentially do a live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn through the Black Women Empowered Incorporated network. It is open to everyone, every race, ethnicity, religion, everyone's welcome. It's Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And essentially through that platform, I've had the opportunity to reach people all over the world. So it's a global platform. There's a couple million followers right now on her platform, on my friend Dr. Jackie King's platform. And I just had the opportunity to do something that's very passionate of mine, which is mental health education. So I talk about different topics of wellness, different topics related to mental health, depending on what season we're in of time, and just practical things that you can do. Because a lot of times I found that it's the small habits that really can drastically change our lives. Not that the big things aren't important too, but the little things that you start to add into your toolkit, that over time is what really will change you into a better person.
You are doing this since 2016.
Yeah.
That's really great. I mean, whenever I meet somebody, if they are good at something, the first thing I say to them is spread your knowledge. Maybe through creating content or through books.
Yeah.
Spread your knowledge.
Yeah.
You are directly, indirectly helping thousands of people through your content, through your books. I'm really applauding for that, ma'am.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, ma'am, when we can expect your next book, Mindset Training?
Yeah, the next book is actually going to be released September 10th.
Oh.
September 10th, so it's coming up.
Yeah, we are waiting for that.
Yes. It's on pre-order now, so I'm not sure where this episode will air, but if you're listening to this before September 10th, you can still pre-order. If it's after September 10th, it's already out.
So, ma'am, we are on the final segment of our podcast. This segment, we call it Instant Insight.
Okay.
I will fire off some quick questions and you have to respond as fast as you can.
Okay.
So, ma'am, are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Beach or mountains?
Oh, that's a tie. Okay. Mountains.
City or countryside?
Ugh. God, these questions are hard. Countryside.
Blue or green?
Blue.
Best way to start the day?
Gratitude practice and prayer.
Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
Most recent hobby you picked up?
Most recent hobby? CrossFit.
What is your go-to stress relief method?
Spending time in nature.
Best way to spend a weekend?
Best way to spend a weekend? Reading and spending time in nature and exercising.
Most used app on your phone?
Probably Instagram.
If you could change 3 things about the world, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a deep question. Okay, 3 things to change about the world. 1 is add in more kindness and compassion for people. 2 would be, well, I'd have to say, reducing the stigma of mental health for sure, that people can get the help that they need. And then the third one, changing anything about the world. I feel like they're all related. So helping people to understand that they deserve to be happy and healthy individuals.
Travel back in time or forward in time?
Ooh, dang. Back in time because I know the answers.
If you could have any dinner guest, dead or alive, who would it be?
Hmm. That's so hard. Oh, I have so many people coming to mind. Um, who do I want to talk to? Probably Barack Obama.
Hmm, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to hear his perspective on some things.
Hmm. Best way to handle success.
Stay grounded.
Best way to handle failure.
Ooh, that's a toughie. Best way to handle failure. Hmm. Very hard thing to do, but work on not being so hard on yourself and understanding that failure can also be a stepping stone to your success.
Hmm. One thing you like to learn.
Hmm. Something I like to learn. I know it sounds silly, but I really want to learn how to surf.
Uh,
I've never gone surfing in the ocean.
oh, okay, surfing. Okay.
Yeah, I really want to learn how to surf.
Yep. You should do that, man.
Yes.
Who inspire you the most?
Gosh, I have a lot of people that inspire me. Currently, okay, three people come to mind currently. So currently, or the past couple years, I would say I was very inspired by my late mentor, Yusuf Salam, who passed away in 2020, but extremely inspired and very instrumental in my life. I'm also very inspired by my current speaking coach, Jeremy Anderson, and I'm also inspired by Ryan Neese, who is the founder of the Ryan Neese Foundation, which I served on the board of. So those three people come to mind.
Best compliment you have ever received?
Best compliment? I would say the best compliment would be just being a giving person.
Favorite book?
Well, okay, I have to do two for this one. Okay, my one of my favorite books ever was it was called The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. I read that a very long time ago in my 20s. But that's been one of my favorite books. But currently my favorite book I would say is Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Favorite movie?
My favorite movie is Eat, Pray, Love.
So, ma'am, if you weren't a psychologist, what would you be?
That's so hard. It's such a hard question because I can't think of like anything else. Um,
You're a born psychologist.
yeah, it's so hard that one. I mean, it would maybe be something in like journalism, because I love like public education, something that works on teaching people different things about the world. So maybe some type of like
Yep.
journalist, something like that.
So, ma'am, what is the most important skill for a psychologist to have, according to you?
Most important skill, empathy. A soft skill, but it's an extremely important skill to have.
Yep. Biggest misconception people have about therapy?
Ooh, a lot. Biggest misconception, people think therapy is sitting on a couch talking about their childhood and that's it. When it can be way more than that, and there's many different forms of therapy.
Apart from the stigma which we talked about earlier, one thing you wish people understood about mental health?
One thing I wish people understood about mental health is that mental health is for everyone. Every single person on the planet has mental health. All of us have an opportunity to do very small things to help our mental health and wellness. And mental health is not just an extreme version of a mental health disorder, but everyone has mental health.
Yep. I just remember I saw one of your video where you mentioned that mental health is like a hidden disability which is going on everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Most influential person in your career?
Well, I know who I think is most influential in the wellness space that I love is Deepak Chopra and also Jay Shetty. They're pretty influential in wellness.
Most challenging part of your job?
Ooh. Two things. One is that the way it's structured, not sometimes. but many times. It can be very, very demanding in work-life balance because I really love what I do. I also have a family and I travel a lot, so that can be demanding at times and just trying to juggle. The other thing is that it's really hard sometimes having the answers that can literally save someone's life, and you just are trying to reach as many people as possible with that information. It's a huge moral responsibility that you have, and that can be very hard and a lot of pressure sometimes to be in that space.
Most rewarding part of your job?
I think the most rewarding part is that I love being able to plant seeds for people. Like when I go into different communities and I talk to different people, and you can just plant a seed of hope and plant a seed of wisdom when it comes to mental health and help people to work on transforming their lives for the better. That's pretty rewarding.
Yep. One last question. What's the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Ooh. Something comes to mind recently, actually, the last couple of years. The best piece of advice I received is to not be so hard on yourself. Celebrate your small wins.
Absolutely. Yep. So, ma'am, that's the end of the rapid fire, the instant insights.
Yeah, that's good.
I hope you had fun.
Yeah, it was. I love that. It was great.
Thank you. So, yeah, that's the end of the podcast as well.
Awesome.
Any final thought?
Final thoughts is, I'll just share that I hope that people remember that there's always hope. Even in really dark, hard periods of your life, there's always hope. It doesn't rain forever. Just to continue to take care of yourself, make yourself your number one priority, and continue your self-care and wellness journey.
That's beautiful, ma'am. Thanks for sharing.
Be well. Hello, everyone. If you are on YouTube, please subscribe to Shree's podcast, The Billion Insights. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today. Your insights into mental health and maintaining balance in life have provided us with valuable tools we can apply in our everyday lives.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, ma'am.
Yes, thank you.
And to our listeners, make sure to check out Dr. Nekeshia Hammond's show and her books. All the links can be found in the description. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time on the Billion Insight Podcast. Until next time, stay curious and take care of your mental health. This is Sri, your host, signing out. Peace